Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener-supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning in to this episode. Today, I've got Rob Elsey, who is a founder of, there we go. For those of you who are watching, he's got his hoodie on, In the Name of Grace. It's a nonprofit, and we're going to dive into that here in a little bit. Cool. But he has been partnering with Oxford Houses now for several years, and working in the recovery community. And so I was so thankful. Rob gave me a direct message just not too long ago.
A few weeks ago.
Introduced himself and was like, hey, let's connect. And like anybody that's working in the recovery world is my friend. I've been in that world now for 3.5 years, and I've grown to love it and love the people in it. So thanks for your work, your heart.
Oh, thanks for taking
your ministry.
The message. Appreciate it.
But yeah, let's get a little backstory first. I like to get a little origin story. Where were you born?
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about maybe your faith journey early on, like your family. Was your family, were you raised in a faith tradition of any kind? That kind of stuff?
Born and raised, for the most part, in Gladstone, Missouri. I think we originally lived out south. When I was first born, we migrated to the Northland when I was about 4 or 5. Traditional family, a mom and dad. I had an older brother. I tell this story. My parents were a little bit of a different generation. They were older when they met, and I was. There's an 8-year gap between my brother and I. We were a Catholic family, so kids just came when they came, right? Kind of traditional how it happened. And so I'm sure when my dad came home and he was 45 years old, my mom said, "Hey, guess what? We're going to have another baby." He probably said, "Huh?" But yeah, so yeah, I think if my dad was alive, I'm 57, he'd be 101, 102. So He was of the great generation. He was a World War II vet. And so consequently, as I look back, I was raised just with a little different set of standards and rules than a lot of my friends, not in a bad way or a good way. It was just different. They were literally a generation older than most of my friends' parents. So that kind of stuck with me, just some values, I think. You're raised Catholic, raised in the church, was an altar boy, went all through parochial school through 6th grade, switched over to public school at that point. It stayed in my faith for the most part, fairly faithful. Adulthood, you kind of go in and out. Had a marriage that failed after about 8 years, and that can kind of test your faith a little bit sometimes. And remarried many years ago, 24 years ago, and have a very strong faith. Take the kids to church every Sunday, and it's God. My faith in Christ has been a big part of the work I do in recovery, as well as helping me get through some difficult situations in life. So yeah, been a residential realtor for 20-some years, since 2001. Was in manufacturing management prior to that. Been a great way to make a living. So I've been kind of a self-employed entrepreneur, so to speak, footloose and fancy free. So yeah, enjoyed that a lot. So been a blessing.
Yeah. Which high school did you go to?
Oak Park.
Okay. Yep. Oak Park. Yep. And I was a Park Hill guy, so
yeah.
A little before you.
Yeah, I think a few years ahead of me. Yeah. Northland looked different back then, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny. I tell this to people, like, if you lived in the 80s back then, we didn't know kids from other high schools. Park Hill was the other end of the world. You went across I-29 and the world fell off, right? And maybe Metro North Mall, you'd run into a few different colored letter jackets, but everybody stayed in their own little zone, it seemed like.
Yeah, Berry Road was a 2-laner.
It was.
And hilly as heck.
Oh, yeah, dangerous almost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, kids would try to, catch air over those hills.
Yeah.
And sometimes not always end up
well, like when we
so
lived
great.
in Gladstone, the county seat was Liberty, so you'd go to title your car or get license plates, it was like an all-day affair to drive to Liberty out Berry Road. And now it's a 3-minute jaunt down 152.
And I was, growing up around Park Hill, Parkville, you had to go to Gladstone to find a stoplight in the Northland.
Yeah.
That was the only stoplights in the Northland. And when I moved to the Northland in the early 70s, it was the only movie theater in the Northland, was that Antioch movie. There was no other place to see a movie in the entire Northland.
Yeah.
Is that little spot.
Gosh, yeah. North Oak was a 2-lane road.
Sometimes we'd go to the drive-in over there on 291, and check. That was like I think there was that little Armour movie theater in North Kansas City.
Yeah.
I do remember going there a couple of times, but it seemed like they had, I don't know the history of that one. They had limited release. I interviewed a guy who runs that place now, and I think we talked about that. But at any rate, well, that's cool. So, when you grew up Catholic, did you continue your faith journey through your young adult years? What?
I lost both my parents pretty young. I was 15 when my dad passed, and I was 21 when my mom passed. So shortly after my mom passed, and I probably didn't practice my faith a whole lot. Still believed, would go to church maybe on a holiday. It's kind of the run-of-the-mill Catholic. You show up on Easter and Christmas, and receive your sacraments. But didn't practice it a lot. Probably until getting married the second time around, and my wife and I have been fairly consistent with our faith. Did quite a bit of stint. My wife joined the Catholic Church, a long time ago now. My brother actually is a clergy. He's a deacon in the Catholic Church, teaches religious ed over at Pius. So
nice.
But currently going to a Presbyterian church here in the Northland, and enjoying it a lot. So,
okay, good. Yeah. And I'm curious too, what your career path out of high school, was it always, have you dabbled in a lot of different things, or?
I skipped college, Fred. I thought I was going to be a professional drag racer. Turns out that's a little harder to break into than just having a fast car. So that didn't really work out.
Like multi-million-dollar sponsors?
Yeah, exactly, right? And, at 18, you don't think that. It's like, I can drive a car, and I like it. I'm a good mechanic. We'll do this. And got a job with a friend of mine from high school. His dad had a small manufacturing company, went to work. And it was small, maybe 8 or 9 guys. And he told the foreman, he said, "You'll probably wind up firing this kid. He's kind of a piece of work. He'll probably show up drunk or wreck his car and not be able to come to work. But, we'll give him a shot." And about that same time, my mom had taken ill, and I really had to start supporting myself. So I just worked a lot. And I was fairly mechanical, and it was a machine shop. So whenever there was a new machine to learn or build, I got involved and wound up running the joint by the time I was 22 years old. So just that evolved in, I figured out the guy managing the shop made a few dollars more an hour than the guy running the machine. Had a lot more stress, but made a little more money. So fell into that career accidentally. So kind of worked uneducated as more of an industrial engineer for about 17 years, actually. In different companies. That's my wife and I met that way. She hired me to be plant manager of a local manufacturing company. She was head of HR. So yeah, we met in the interview.
There you go. Yeah. Well, that's a good interview.
It was. It worked out real well. Several
get extra occasions. Credit for that one.
Yeah. Got the job and the girl. Not simultaneously, though.
Right. Yeah. You have to follow the rules, right?
For sure. Exactly. Yeah, it was a challenge.
Oh, man. Well, so tell us a little bit about what got you into your nonprofit In the Name of Grace. How did that evolve?
Sure.
And we'll get some backstory on that, and then kind of dive into the actual work itself.
Sure.
Yeah.
I am not a person of long-term recovery in the traditional sense. I think when I really think about it, and as I dive into a lot of self-work, doing personal inventory, I think we all struggle with different types of addiction, but I don't struggle with traditional types. We think of alcoholics as people that it enables or disables them from being able to be functioning at their job and things. And we think of addicts as, the bottom of the barrel, they're out stealing catalytic converters to buy drugs and things like that. And I certainly don't fall into any of those realms, but neither do a lot of people that I know in recovery either. But we'll talk about the stigma here in a minute. I had the misfortune. I have a 30-year-old daughter, and she was 18 years old, graduating high school back in 2011. And we watched her senior year. She left sports. The group of friends changed. She was changing. We were watching it happen like a typical parent. And she's actually my daughter from a previous marriage. She's my wife's stepdaughter. She lived with us full time since about 8th grade. And we kind of knew that she was probably dabbling in marijuana. We knew she drank. I hadn't really had a lot of bad experiences, really. But right after graduating high school, she was going to take a real estate class and get her real estate license to be kind of assistant for me. Thought maybe she'd take that as a career path, and had her enrolled in college up at Northwest Missouri State, and just sat down with her on a Sunday night and said, hey, I know you're using weed, and it probably just needs to stop. You need to kind of get serious about life. And she got angry and literally ran out the door with nothing except the clothes on her back, and we didn't see her for the rest of the summer. Got in touch with some of her older friends that we knew real well, and they said, yeah, we've been meaning to reach out to you guys. It's a lot worse than you think. And then found out that she'd been probably getting high on marijuana every morning before school for the whole last second semester of school, and it was starting to spawn into, experimenting with other drugs too. So dealt with that for about a year. She got herself enrolled down at UCM, and got in there and didn't have a way to pay for it. We reconnected, helped her out with school, got through 2 semesters of school, came home that summer, and she was a mess, just a mess. And we knew that something had to be done. She was, unfortunately, her drug of choice had spun into benzodiazepines or Xanax, and it had a pretty good grip on her. So got her into a treatment center down in Texas after failing out of a couple local inpatient or outpatient treatments, and had a great experience. Got her clean, got her sober, got her into an Oxford house. And then, thought she was, and we were early into it. And I remember hearing in treatment that, relapse is part of recovery. And of course, we're very naive at this point and very young into it. And we're like, oh, no, we've got this. She's got it. She's good. She'll be good. She'll be fine. She's got it. She's clean. She's sober. This piece of cake. Yeah, that wasn't the case. And still to this day, unfortunately, isn't the case. But it did start our journey into being parents of an addict, having addiction impact our family in a very negative way, and really, for the most part, kind of consuming a lot of our time, our resources for the next 10, 12 years. So, yeah, even up to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, so a daughter who is still wrestling. Is that correct?
She is, yeah. She is currently still what we would call in her active addiction. So she's, unfortunately, the benzodiazepines eventually spun into methamphetamine. So methamphetamine is her drug of choice, and anybody who's listening or watching knows anything about methamphetamine, it impairs you cognitively so bad that coming out of meth is probably honestly the hardest drug to come out of, even harder than opioids, because of the cognitive damage it does. It takes so long to heal. So yeah, she's had a few bouts here and there, but yeah, as far as I know, she's still out there somewhere in her active addiction. And
this has led you into your second round of parenting, is that right?
Yes, sir, it has. Yeah, so we have Mariah and Joey. Raya, I call her for short. So Raya is 5 and Joey is 3, and they are my biological grandchildren from my daughter that we have had the blessing of taking on as our own. The adoption was finalized September 11th of 2020. We got guardianship and kind of, I guess, possession of Mariah when she was 19 months. And my daughter was pregnant with Joey when she came to us with Raya, and we kind of ran an inpatient treatment center out of our house to keep her sober till Joey was born. So we've had guardianship of Joey since his first breath. And so, we've in adoption the same time we adopted Mariah. So shortly, probably within 8 or 9 weeks after Joey's birth, our daughter Caitlin relapsed, and we kind of thought she probably would, headed back to the street life. And left the kids behind with us. So we're blessed. Yeah, middle-aged, raising 2 little ones. So
Yeah.
it's a interesting
That's what
journey.
I'm saying. You're my hero. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you getting In the Name of Grace going.
Sure.
Because obviously, addiction hits home with you in a deep, deep, deep way, right?
Yeah.
And so you've allowed that to develop into trying to take action to help people in this space in life.
Yeah.
So grateful for that.
Thank you.
People who take time to reach people in addiction, and it's just so important and so powerful. So tell us a little bit about In the Name of Grace,
It's
how
kind
that
of it's kind of a two-pronged thing. I'll be very honest. When we came up with the idea for In the Name of Grace, Caitlin was in a good place, and that's what kind of spawned it. She was up in Omaha in a Oxford house. She'd been out of treatment again, doing pretty well. Had a job and got her driver's license back and had a car. She would come back and forth, doing pretty good. And we were really feeling blessed and thankful. And there was a thing called the Chat Series, and it was 3 different women came to Kansas City at the Kauffman Center and did a chat. And one of them was a lady by the name of Liz Murray. And Liz had written a book called Breaking Dawn, Homeless to Harvard. And it was her own personal story being raised by addicts and kind of growing up as a street kid in New York. And she told her whole story, and I was just mesmerized by it. It was just so motivating. The very next night, my wife Anise and I were going to a Sporting KC game, and we're walking from our car to the thing, and I just had this overwhelming feeling. I just looked at her, I said, how come we're not doing something to help the recovery world? I think it's time we really think about giving back. We've really been blessed. And she said, you're right. Why aren't we? And so it kind of started with that, and I didn't have any idea what it looked like, what it was going to be, what it was going to be called. One thing I wanted to do was work towards removing the stigma of addiction, and then the other was to maybe inspire families to have hope, to learn to not enable yet be supportive, that you can really give tough love, and it's very challenging to wrap your head around that. You want to enable, they're your child, you want to protect them. But, people come in their deep, dark addiction have to find their own bottom. And to let your child find bottom can be very challenging. What we had learned was that in the Kansas City, Missouri area, there were really no Oxford houses on the Missouri side. They were really prevalent on the Kansas side of the metro area. And I really didn't know why. I've been in real estate a long time. I wanted to see, were these owned by individual private real estate investors? If so, I'd like to own a few. How do we get some going in Kansas City? Obviously, there's a need. And there wasn't anybody to talk to. And we simultaneously got invited to Friends of Recovery, or FORA is the organization in Kansas that really helps promote Oxford houses and helps run the Oxford houses. We got invited to their annual banquet. And so on the invitation, and it was from a lady that was a short-time sponsor of my daughters, and she was very involved in FORA. So she sent us this. On the invitation was the All About FORA and the executive director. So I called her. We sat down. She said, well, in Missouri, there's no funding for outreach workers. So there's nobody to help not only open houses, there's nobody to help the houses stay stable and solid. And they're in deep, deep need of outreach. And I said, well, what does that require? She said, well, it requires money. I said, okay, well, I guess we got to figure out how to raise money. So my wife came up with an acronym of In the Name of Grace. We enlisted 3 others, very good friends of ours, Doug Ballou and Nancy Whitworth, a married couple here in the Northland. They had experience with addiction in their family. Doug worked in the mental health field, and we just thought they could be a great help to us. And then another gentleman, Michael Fox, who was a young guy, financial guru, big heart, didn't know at the time he had any addiction in his family, but he just jumped on for his love of us. And we just set out to figure out how to raise funds to get outreach going in Kansas City. And it kind of spun from that. We went to the Fora Gala to meet gentlemen from Oxford, and they were literally, it's a fun story, and they tell it. The gentleman's name is Dan Hahn. They were walking out the door, and I heard they were leaving. I literally almost tackled them out the door and said, hey, my name's Rob Elsey. We're starting a foundation. We want to help you guys. They hear this a lot, right? And they're like, okay. Well, then we followed up, and within a year we had a contract and we were making things happen. So it's a very unique situation. I'm very proud to say it's the only privately funded contract with Oxford House in the entire country. the relationship between In the Name of Grace
Yeah.
and Oxford House.
Yeah, so let's assume that some people are listening that don't
Sure.
really know the Oxford House history
Yeah.
or how they function.
Sure.
So why don't you give just a little bit of the Oxford history,
Yeah.
then point us specifically to how you
Sure.
partner with them.
Because if you're not
So-
familiar, if you're not
Yeah.
in the world of recovery, it may be a name that means
Right.
nothing to you. Oxford houses are sober living houses.
And I think it gets a little confused because, like, if you go back to the beginning of the AA days, so the big book or AA started in 1935, right? But there was the Oxford movement that had some influence with Bill Wilson, I think.
Yes.
Who founded AA.
Yes.
But this is totally different.
Correct.
The two are
Complete
but
separate.
it's so
Yes.
it's so easy to associate them because they're connected to the recovery world, right?
So Oxford House, again, they're sober living houses. What makes them extremely unique is they're independently ran by the residents. So there is no hired individual. There is no Oxford employee that lives in the house. They're literally democratically ran.
And this was started in like 75, something like that?
1975, yes, by a gentleman named Paul Malloy. And Paul was a Capitol Hill attorney, that self-proclaimed alcoholic, a drunk, as he would say, had lost pretty much everything in his life, got into treatment, was living in what was literally a halfway house for people coming, trying to work their way back into life. And it was it had lost its funding, and him and some of the gentlemen in the house went to the owner of the house, said, could we continue to lease this house? We don't have anywhere to go. We promise we'll run it like it's our own and do a good job. And that was Oxford House 1. It was in Silver Springs, Maryland, back in the 70s. So from that became this model of the 10 traditions, which is very much modeled after the 12 steps. Mm-hmm. They're very congruent and they run parallel with each other. So what they learned is they could open up these houses. They'd take a few people with long-term sobriety, get them into the house, bring in the newcomer, and as in the 12th step, I mean, your goal is to help that newcomer through his journey and fortifying your own journey. And so they say you come for yourself and you stay for others, and you're welcome to stay in an Oxford House as long as you want, as long as you're giving back to the newcomer and feeling that you're being of value. If you feel that you're not really being of value, it might be time that you go on with your sobriety in a different method. But yeah, so they're very scalable because they're owned by an independent real estate investor. There will be chapters, and chapters will have somewhere between 12 and 20 houses. And then the chapters has a group of officers, and that's who kind of governs it. And that's all overseen by a gentleman or a lady who would be called the outreach coordinator. And they're the hired person from Oxford. And they live in the state. A lot of times they'll live in one of the houses. They don't have to. It is required that they are an alumni. And in fact, anyone that works for Oxford House, Inc. is not only in recovery, all but one person is an alumni of the houses out of the several hundred they employ. So it really is an organization of itself.
It's nationwide. There's how many Oxford houses do you think?
Just about 3,300, 3,400.
In America.
Worldwide, but predominantly in the U.S. There's
Okay.
in 31 states, I believe.
Okay. And so let's just take somebody who, winds up in a rehab.
Yep.
Or, has to do something to avoid jail time or
For
prison
sure.
prison time.
Yeah.
And they need some help staying sober.
Yep.
So they would willingly sign up to be
100%. Yeah, if you're not ready to be there, then you're not. You have to go through an interview process, and they're very good in the interview process to see, are you doing this for you, or are you doing this because somebody's telling you to?
Right.
And if you're doing it because you've got, even if you've got 1 day clean, you can be accepted in, or if today is day 1, you can be accepted in, but you got to really have a willingness to get sober or stay sober, and work on yourself and be part of a family that's going to help you. So peer recovery is really what it's about. There's an interview process. It takes a majority vote. Typically it's 100%, and you're voted in, and you pay your deposit. You pay a weekly earned expenses shared, or EES. They don't pay rent; they pay weekly EES because it all gets pooled and pays the rent out of that. And pays the utilities, keeps the lights on, puts some basic groceries in the pantry. You move in. If you don't have clothing, you don't have a job. You don't have the ability to drive. The guys or gals in the house will help you. They pull together 3 or 4 houses. It seems like we've got them in clusters, and they do a good job of grabbing guys, grabbing gals, taking them to meetings as need be, helping them go find work. It really, really works well.
Yeah. So you have men's houses, women's houses,
women
and
with children, and
women
men
with
with
children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and men
Yep.
with children. Wow.
Yep.
And they're gonna go to meetings.
They are typically required to work some type of a recovery program.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally it's a 12-step type program. I don't think it necessarily has to be. We all find recovery in different ways. There's some other great recovery methods out there that I think are acceptable as long as you're working some type of a recovery program.
Mm-hmm.
They do have to work, pay their own way. If you got a family member or somebody that needs to help you out the first week or two till you find work, we're blessed that the economy is pretty easy to get a decent paying job, and you can afford to live on your own. With even a fast food job these days. And in Oxford House, it's pretty cheap way to live. And you can stay as long as you want, as long as you're working a program, you're not disruptive, you don't drink and drug. If you drink or drug or you're disruptive, they'll call an emergency meeting. They'll test you if need be. If it's behavior,
Do they do random drug testing at the houses?
A lot of them do, yeah. And if it's a solid house and they've got a long-term recovery, they may not. If they wind up with a problem and someone relapses, they may go back to it. But yeah, it's a very tough situation. If you relapse, they're going to call you out on it. You're going to have 60 minutes to get your stuff and get out. They're learning to protect their environment. So as much as they love their brothers and sisters that relapse, they have to go. Now, once they get sober, they can reapply to another house. So you're not completely out on the streets,
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of tough love.
Yeah.
For sure.
Interesting. So that's the Oxford
Model. Yep.
So then how specifically does In the Name of Grace help the Oxford? How do you partner with that?
Yeah, it's a very unique partnership. In most of the states where there are Oxford houses, the state has federal block grants that are allocated to Oxford, and there's a contract between Oxford and the state. The outreach employees were typically employees of Oxford House, but it's funded through the state and it's through a contract. So what makes us unique is we have that contract now for the entire state of Missouri In the Name of Grace. And they have 2 outreach workers now here in Missouri, one in Kansas City, one in Southwest Missouri. They have a salary, they have living expenses, they have operating expenses, as well as some overhead with their overseeing bosses and training and things like that. And that all gets taken care of by Oxford House, and every month we get a bill and we simply write the check to fund it. Currently, we do 90% of it through private fundraising. We've been blessed with some small grants, private grants, and foundation grants here locally. Nothing from any municipality, nothing from any government source as of yet. Oxford House is working well in the Kansas City, Missouri area now with Clay County, Platte County, Jackson County drug courts. So we got a lot of residents, like you say, who are either coming out of incarceration or able to avoid incarceration by getting into a sober living situation. And it's phenomenal. We've grown from when we first took over there. I think were 9 houses. They closed it all the way down to 4. They closed 5 houses, moved 1 house, and then we are now up to what will be 25 houses in Kansas City with a total of 44 across the state. So, yeah, 200 plus beds here in Kansas City for men and women to go to bed tonight sober and safe.
Wow.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's amazing. Good work. So I'm going to do a quick plug. Those of you who are listening, if you're a regular listener, consider being a part of our support team. You can go to the website, spiritualityadventures.com. And we have just a small team of supporters that make this happen. So we appreciate those of you who are regulars and jump on there and join the support team. And we are constantly putting out some great content. And I love the recovery world. So this is one of my favorite topics to interview people on. So you mentioned, Rob, about stigma. And let's chat a little bit about stigma.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, just maybe a little segue into that. As a pastor who wasn't an alcoholic for most of my life, I always tried to, either partner with the AA world. We ended up starting a thing called Celebrate Recovery at the church that I pastored several years ago, and ended up helping a lot of people, right? And I had read the big book, and I had I was familiar with the 12-step program. Never thought that I would, end up being a person in that world, like coming out of recovery, or in recovery, coming out of the pastor world into recovery. And then for me in the pastor world, I never saw people with these issues as stigmas. It was like, for me, it was just always an opportunity for the church to love and to be present and to help however we could, right? But having now experienced it in a pretty dramatic way, my meltdown and all that, I've become far more acutely aware of the stigma issues. And then what was interesting was there was a guy, and we talked about this when we chatted offline, but I forgot his name, but the guy that founded Shatterproof.
Yeah, Gary Mendenhall.
Gary Mendenhall. Yeah. I met Gary when he came to Kansas City a couple of years ago, I think maybe, and he does a lot about exposing stigma.
He does.
And he mentioned two statistics that stuck with me. Tell me if these sound accurate. 50% of the population does not want to have a neighbor who is in recovery, like as a neighbor.
Probably accurate.
And then about the same percentage, about 50% of the people do not want somebody in their family marrying somebody that is in recovery. So I'm thinking that's pretty hefty,
isn't it? That's
pretty hefty stigma stuff, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm in recovery, and so I was thinking, well, how's this going to play out the rest of my life?
Right, for sure. Yeah.
And of course I'm contributing to the recovery world as I'm in it myself. So yeah, talk a little bit about stigma. What's your experience with that? How have you tried to work with that issue?
I get the opportunity to speak publicly, not as often as I'd like, but when I do, I usually start out with a story, and it's a little bit of a shock, and I'll share that if it's okay.
Yeah.
Shock the viewers. I'll tell the story. My daughter was very blessed. She was very fortunate, very privileged. She grew up in the Northland. We lived over in an area called the Fairways, literally on a golf course. Nice house, nice neighborhood in a cul-de-sac. 16th birthday, she got a little Mustang convertible. She was an athlete, lettered her sophomore year. And I tell the story that it was probably maybe 11th grade when she probably, whatever Friday it was, she put her letter jacket on, grabbed her backpack and got in her convertible and drove to school thinking, I'm going to go to a party tonight and I'm probably going to try marijuana for the first time. I doubt she was thinking, I can't wait to do that because I hope I eventually wind up living homeless on the streets, selling myself for methamphetamines. Now, again, that's a shocking statement, and I apologize, but that's the reality of her life. Did she make a bad decision to try marijuana illegally, an illicit drug that was illegal at the time, especially for someone her age? Yes, she did. Was she probably in company of kids that I probably am friends with today that are now adults, that are married, college educated, have families? Yes, she was. Were they predisposed to be an addict? No, they weren't. Was she? Yes, she was. It is a mental health situation. It is not a criminal justice situation. She was predisposed to have addictive tendencies in her DNA. Unfortunately, it's in her biological mom. It goes back deep in my own family. And she just wasn't able to recreationally use alcohol or weed. And both of those spin her down a path of other drugs. And you build up a resistance and tolerance, and your dopamine receptors get damaged, and more is always what you actually become addicted to is more. And it takes,
and the more does less and less and less.
It does.
It gets to a point where the fun's gone.
Right. And it's that my life is becoming manageable, right? And I always tell people, I said, if I told you my daughter had childhood cancer or juvenile diabetes, you would have a different look on your face as I'm talking to you. It'd probably be of more empathy. If you have addiction in your family, you probably have empathy for me. I tell you, I'm raising 2 small kids. You probably have empathy for me. But what you have to understand is the only disease I know of that takes somebody that has a lot of potential, maybe everything in the world ahead of them, and it can take them and demonize them and criminalize them. If you're a person of faith, it is literally the devil has grappled you and has a hold of you and doesn't want to let go. There's some wonderful poem about addiction, how it's talking to the person. I'm sure you've read it. It's like, I am your best friend. I am your worst nightmare. I own you, and it really is. And it's, no one ever would choose that lifestyle. Somebody in recovery, I'm sure you can attest that, the things you had to go through to get to where you were, as a blessing as it is that you've gone through them, it wasn't anything you'd ever wish upon anyone.
No, and it
right.
And I'm still looking for the blessing. I'm still holding on to the promises, as we like to say in the recovery world, right?
For sure.
No, it's a taker. It's a taker. It's a taker.
It is, and it turns people into narcissistic sociopaths.
Well, you're just living to get high. That's all that.
That's it.
That's all that.
That's it.
That's
Nothing
all
else
happens.
matters at a certain point, and it's all consuming.
Plan your day around it.
It does.
It's all consuming.
It's,
and some people are doing that and still showing up to work, and some people aren't. You know,
Fred, they are, and I think that's something we need to think about. Is we talk about addiction, and alcoholism, which obviously is just another form of addiction. We look at the alcoholic as the guy who's crashed his car, maybe hurt somebody and lost his job because of it. We look at, an addict, like, again, if somebody who's living on the streets, or they're stealing from their family to buy drugs, or, robbing copper out of houses or whatever. We live in this crazy, crazy world right now where, if you really do step forward and do a personal inventory of yourself and really think about what consumes a good portion of your time, there are algorithms in social media that are literally designed to intervene our dopamine sensors. I mean, literally addict us to the social media. I mean, and why? Because things are being sold on social media. I mean, it's marketing at its finest, right? Marketing algorithms designed to intercept our dopamine sensors. And, I think a lot of us struggle with different types of addiction that we don't see as addiction because it doesn't fit in the traditional sense.
Right.
I think everybody could benefit from reading the big book. I think the 12 Steps applies to anybody trying to look for a spiritual way through a higher power to better their life. I really do. And, so I think, when you really want to stigmatize it, you have to take a deep look at yourself and what you do on a daily basis. And does this serve my future self or does it not? If it doesn't, then it probably is something that could be worked on. And maybe it's an addictive trait. Maybe it's addictive behavior. Right. Maybe it's social media. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's, who knows? Binge watching is a big thing these days. Yeah,
I like to... and I think I've had a few addiction experts on here, and we can talk about substance addictions. So where you're ingesting things like drugs, alcohol, food,
sugar, yeah.
But then you have these behavioral addictions, for sure, that really play on the same neurosystems. 100%.
Right?
It's activate all the same
for those dopamine hits,
systems.
Right? Trying for a quick, cheap dopamine hit.
It could be shopping. It could be gaming.
100%.
It could be sex. It could be
and we live in an instant world.
Gambling. Right? It could be OCD behavior
100%.
Where you're just like obsessing over
100%.
Things and yeah. So, and then what? I don't think most Americans, this is just my opinion, having pastored a few thousand over the years and then having been in the recovery community for 3.5 years or so, I don't think most Americans buy into the disease model for addiction. And I think that's a part of the stigma. Because I think bottom line, most people think it's a moral failure. And, my issues were plastered all over the world, literally through, as moral failure, right? And it was an insomnia issue that I was trying to deal with that ultimately led to prescription Xanax. So like what your daughter, the benzo, that's the benzo world. And then I, unfortunately, stupidly added alcohol with the benzos. And so now all of a sudden every night I'm doing alcohol and Xanax, which is a horrible combo. But I didn't have any fear of that I had done some marijuana and some recreational drugs as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, came to Christ and quit without any help. And
so I figured that was,
and lived the rest of my life up until I was 55, not being an addict or an alcoholic. But all of a sudden, when I was on the Xanax and the alcohol every night for over 2 years, I was an addict and an alcoholic basically. And I think that I probably always have had an addictive personality. There's probably some DNA down there rattling around that would open that door for me. But I didn't have any fear of it, and I think maybe that was a part of the problem too. Is that by the time I was chasing sleep, so I wasn't chasing anything but sleep. I was just trying to sleep. I had never slept very, very well, but all of that resulted in some bad moral decisions on my part because your frontal lobe gets compromised, right? So people don't realize it, but, addiction affects the prefrontal lobe, which is where we manage our emotions and do our best decision making. So when you compromise your prefrontal lobe,
I love that word compromise because that's what it is.
You compromise it. You just don't make good decisions, and your decisions soon start being driven by your addiction, right?
Yep.
And your emotions too, as well.
And the addiction becomes so strong that you can rationalize anything, right?
So most Americans, I think, well, that's a moral decision. You're a bad person.
Yeah.
There's some people that just don't have any grace for that at all.
I have a take on that, if I can share.
Using that name grace, right? There's a lot of people that don't have any grace for this stuff.
And grace is an acronym that stands for giving recovering addicts a chance to evolve.
Oh, nice.
So, and man, just so appropriate, right? Because we all could use a little grace once upon. And grace in the Bible is God's unmerited gift to us or upon us. And we didn't earn it. He just gives it to us. We just coming out of Easter, what a true... proclamation of the grace he's given us. He gave his own son for us, At any rate, I have had the opportunity to listen to a gentleman named Dr. Stuart Gitlow, and Dr. Gitlow is one of the foremost addiction psychologists in the country. And he made a really good point. Several years ago, recreational marijuana is being legalized pretty widespread across the country here in the state of Missouri. And I'm not going to say whether I approve it, not approve it. That's not the point. But what Dr. Gitlow mentioned was that when we legalize marijuana, he didn't say if, he said when we legalize marijuana, we will simply have more people addicted to marijuana. And here's why. There are plenty of people that have an addictive tendency, addictive personality, or it's in their DNA. They're of that 20-25% of Americans. Of humans, and they don't try marijuana simply because it's illegal. Maybe, maybe to interfere with your job if you're tested, for your employment or what you do for your employment, or maybe you just don't want to be a lawbreaker. There are people that actually follow the laws. They don't speed. They don't do this. Me, I've had a few speeding tickets over the years, so there are a few laws that I find compromisable. But for me, marijuana was one that was not. It was an illegal substance, and I just didn't see the need to break the law to impair my mind. I had alcohol, and I've been able to be a casual drinker most of my life. But I will tell you, once it becomes legal and you try it, you're going to have a percentage of people that will become addicted to it. And a good way to explain it is if you're a casual drinker and you enjoy drinking to become intoxicated, not because it's a social thing, I have a drink when I'm having dinner. No, I drink with my friends to get drunk because I enjoy it. It numbs the pain, whatever it is, whatever excuse you use, whatever it is it does for you. You can achieve that same feeling so much faster with marijuana use that if it takes you 8 to 10, 12 beers, if you're a beer drinker and you've built a tolerance over a 20, 30-year period to get to a level of intoxication, when you first try marijuana, it's probably going to do it a lot faster. Would that lead to an addiction? It possibly could, because you're able to get to that state a lot quicker, a lot easier, and now it's not illegal, so it's not a moral issue. So is addiction a moral issue? No, because you can do it legally. People have been consuming alcoholic beverages since the beginning of alcoholic beverages. There are statistics that show for the next 2 generations after the Prohibition back in the 20s, the next 2 generations had a lesser population, considerably lesser population of registered alcoholism. And alcohol related events, deaths, driving accidents, things like that, over the next 2 generations. So it did have an impact. Not having access to legal narcotics did have an impact that we'll see over the next 2 decades, over the next 2 generations, where we will have more people become addicted. So is it a moral issue? No. It can start as something very simple. And if it's in your DNA, it's in your DNA. I follow a gentleman that I won't say here because I don't know well enough to give him the credit for it, but he believes that and he's in recovery, and he's also an entrepreneur, and he's an entrepreneurial coach. He believes that most addiction is trauma-based. And there's some really good thought to that, because if you really do a self-inventory, you can think back. We all have trauma, and it doesn't have to be that you were molested or beaten or anything. It just, something traumatic has happened to you. Maybe you lost a loved one. Maybe just, maybe you were overweight and bullied. I mean, who knows? Trying to get rid of that pain, can really spin into addiction, I think.
Yeah. So I think destigmatizing is a huge deal, and I do think the disease model is a good way to help the average population
For sure.
Begin to have a little bit more empathy with those that are wrestling with addictions. I think also just if you've had a family member or a friend or a loved one that has gone through this, they're in a battle that's like a disease model works really, really well. So if you think about somebody fighting cancer,
For sure.
I remember Gary, who founded the Shatterproof. He started off with the story of his son, who started wrestling with an addiction as a teenager, and then a neighbor's son who was battling cancer. Both the same age, both from the same family, both from the same sense of privilege and resources, but the resources that were rallied around the cancer versus the resources that were rallied around the addiction were completely worlds apart. So we rally around diseases, and start foundations around diseases
100%.
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And but yet that addiction is one that it probably still comparatively has a lot less money.
Oh my gosh.
A lot less money going into helping people recover from addictions.
Sure.
I think still because of that stigma, because
100%.
of the moral component to people judge it
it's
with.
still viewed and looked at as a choice, and no one ever chooses cancer. Clearly not, right? Yet we do choose to live an unhealthy lifestyle.
Or diabetes.
Right.
Or,
But yet we do choose to live very unhealthy lifestyles in this country. Obesity is probably the number one killer, honestly, of Americans. And that very much is a choice, as you're unhealthy and you open yourself up to diseases and things.
But at the same time, there are genetic components to that as well.
100%.
Right?
Yes, there are. Yes, there
I know
are.
there can, if you
100%.
I mean, you can trace diabetes generationally.
Oh my
you can
gosh,
trace
type
obesity
1.
generationally.
Yep.
There's people who can eat the same crap and be skinny.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And people who end up being obese eating the same diet.
For sure.
And it's all genetics.
Yeah.
And so so I think there's a lot more to the disease model than we ever realize when it comes to a lot of our problems.
For sure.
Definitely nurture nature.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Both the nature part, which would be the DNA part, but then the nurture, the context, the environment, the choices, they play together, So, so tell people about how they could, learn about what you're doing, connect with it,
That's
that
great.
kind of thing.
We have a website, which is just www.inthenameofgrace.org. You can get a lot of information about kind of how we started, my story, stories of some of our board members, as well as how you can donate. Again, we are 100% privately funded. We throw one huge fundraiser every year, which is coming up this fall. It's at the American Royal Barbecue, which is Kansas City, Missouri's largest outdoor party. We raise a lot of funds. We have sponsorships available as well as just tickets at the gate to get in. We always have the M80s, which is a local 80s cover band. Really top-rated cover or 80s cover band. They travel the whole country actually. And there are entertainment, world-class, award-winning barbecue served up, and have to be very honest, full disclosure, it is not a sober party. It's the American Royal, so yeah, the drinks are involved, which is awesome. I will tell you, we have a residents of the Oxford House, people that are in long-term recovery. They come out and they volunteer and they run the food lines for us and stuff, and they love being involved. And the very next night, we have a sober party for all the residents to come out. But yeah, it's our big fundraiser.
What time of year is this?
That is September or October 1st, the last Friday of October or September, which I think is actually October 1st this year. So you can go at the website and get the save to date and see how to sponsor or buy tickets.
If somebody's listening to this and they think, oh man, I've got a son or a daughter or a friend that I think maybe the Oxford House system would work for them. What would they do? What are the steps they would take?
Easiest way is go to www.oxfordvacancies.com. Just spell that out. And you can see where there are houses that have openings for men and women, and likewise, and go online and fill out an application and set up interviews. If you have a loved one that is in dire need, and the interview is until Sunday and they need a bed tonight, you can possibly get an emergency interview set up, or they can couch somebody, especially if they're coming out of jail or something they need something immediately. They can usually work with you. Go to our website. All this will be listed on there as well as my contact info. I love talking to family members. I do. I've been through it for a long time. I have a little philosophy that, bad things happen to a lot of us. We all have bad things we experience. And I think if all of us just took that bad experience, and if you get out of your circle of pity, because you can drown in your own tears, right? Mm-hmm. Sit there and just, why me, why me, why me? It's like, what's happening to you isn't happening to you. It's happening. You're just being affected by it. It isn't personal. It's not about you. And realize that this is a problem. If I'm dealing with it as a father, there are probably other fathers dealing with it too. Get involved. Get into an Al-Anon group. Call me. I'll help you find some resources. If everybody did their part, we could wipe this out. I personally have a goal that somehow, some way, I'm going to have to live to be 100 years old. I'm going to see the extinction of methamphetamine addiction in my lifetime. So I'm going to have to live long enough to make that happen. But I have some ideas and thoughts on it. But yeah, just get involved. And it is a disease. And if just don't be ashamed by it. Don't be ashamed if you're in somebody who is in need of recovery. Don't be ashamed if you have a family member, a loved one, or a friend that's in need of recovery. It affects a lot more of us than you realize. And I think being open about it helps.
Yeah, you bet. Tell the website one more time, In the Name of Grace.
Sure, www.inthenameofgrace.org. And so you just spell it out.
In the Name of Grace.
Grace, yeah.
.org. Okay.
Yeah, you can go out there, and again, some good resources on it as well, and just some good stories about us and some media stuff. And yeah.
Excellent. Well, I love what you're doing. And
thank you.
I was delighted to make this connection.
Likewise.
And talk to you.
Likewise.
I have a friend that I know served on your board for a little while. And I have, I'm in relationship with several people who are living in Oxford houses. And, the thing that just to maybe, speak to that stigma issue again, is the thing that I've realized, because I'm in relationship with physicians that are in recovery, lawyers that are in recovery, pastors that are in recovery, business leaders, CEOs that are in recovery. It is not a discriminator of persons. Addiction, alcoholism, these things cut across every kind of strata, every social strata,
racially, socioeconomically,
everything.
It does not care.
It's not a respecter of persons, and it does not discriminate.
No,
and so I just think leaning into it, talking about it, owning it, realizing that people who are actually in recovery, working their programs, are some of the best human beings on the planet.
Amen.
On the planet.
Amen.
And the thing that I've realized as a pastor is, if the whole world would work the program, the whole world would be a better place.
Wouldn't it, though? Seriously, right? I mean, just the personal inventory part of it, and accountability.
There's just not a part of it that wouldn't be a benefit to anybody.
Amen.
Even if you wrestle with just eating too much before you go to bed, or any number of sort of nagging bad habits
Yeah.
that we can develop
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
And just being a better person,
Yep.
a better husband, a better wife, a better parent, a better coworker, a better owner, whatever your world is. These recovery programs are just brilliant when it comes to being better humans.
It is. I'm blessed that so many of my close contacts are people in the recovery community because of the work I do. And I always start off saying, I have more respect for people in recovery than anybody else on the planet. I wake up and I have my list of what I have to do. I have to get the kids ready, yada, yada, yada. People in recovery, they wake up and the very first thing they have to do is tell themselves it's a day they choose to be clean and sober. And that's first and foremost in their life. And whatever resources they have to pull on to make that happen. And that's just incredible amount of respect for that. And they live a different lifestyle because of it. You want brutal honesty, go talk to somebody in recovery.
Right.
They'll give it to you, right?
That's right. That's what's been so refreshing, actually. It's just really refreshing.
I have some amazing friends in long-term recovery that have stories that would just make the average person cringe.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rob, for
Thank you, Fred.
our time together. Thanks for doing this interview. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the work you're doing in the name of grace. I am just so grateful to the recovery community, to the people who show up. We can't do it alone. We need each other. We need community.
For sure. Community is the word.
I appreciate you giving your time, energy, and money to this.
It's become just a belief that I was put on this earth to do it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you
for tuning into Spirituality Adventures, and we'll see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.